beginning, there was no order, no separation, no distinction between one form of life and another. Before the Erdtree pierced the sky with its golden radiance, before Queen Marika ascended to godhood, before the concept of death itself was bound and sealed away, there existed something primordial, something ancient, beyond measure, a melting pot where all life converged, blended, and reformed in endless cycles of becoming. This was the crucible, not a place precisely, though it existed within what would later be called the Great Tree, not a being, though it pulsed with vital energy that defied comprehension. The crucible was essence itself, the primordial form from which all life would eventually spring. It was chaos and potential unified, a divine soup of existence, where the boundaries between flesh and scale, between wing and horn, between beast and man, simply did not exist. In those days before days, life took forms that would later be deemed monstrous, aberrant, unclean. Creatures bore the aspects of many beings at once. Horns sprouted from humanoid brows, not as curse but as blessing. Wings unfurled from backs, not meant for flight. Tails swayed behind those who walked upright, scales intermingled with skin. The misbegotten, those chimeric beings that would later be cast aside and enslaved, were once the natural children of this age. Their twisted forms, their amalgamation of disparate parts, were not mistakes, but the crucible's truest expression. The Crucible Knights understood this better than most who came after. These ancient warriors, clad in armor that seemed to breathe with the essence of that primordial age, channeled the power of the Crucible itself. Their incantations allowed temporary manifestations of those ancient forms, horns to gore enemies, tails to sweep them aside, breath that could scorch stone. They were not calling upon foreign powers or forbidden magic. They were remembering, touching something so old that it predated the very concept of blasphemy. Even then, there were powers. Not the outer gods that would later impose their will upon the world, but something else. Ancient lords that ruled over this primordial chaos. We catch glimpses of them in fragments, in ruins, in the bones of civilizations, long turned to dust. The dragons were among the first. Magnificent creatures of stone and storm, they ruled the skies when the world was young. In a place called Farum Azula, a tempest-racked citadel that floated beyond time itself, there sat a throne. Upon that throne, Placidusax, the Dragon Lord, kept vigil as Elden Lord to a god whose name has been lost to eternity. This god fled or died or transcended, leaving Placidusax to wait in that crumbling city outside of time, still waiting, still guarding a throne long abandoned. His heads turned back upon themselves in eternal vigil for a master who would never return. The age of the Crucible was not peaceful, but neither was it troubled by the concepts that would later tear the world asunder. There was no death, because death had not yet been defined. There was no order, because order had not yet been imposed. Life simply was, in all its chaotic, beautiful, terrible glory. But nothing lasts forever, not even primordial chaos. From the cosmos beyond the lands between, something was watching, something with a vision of perfect order, of defined boundaries, of laws that would govern existence itself. The greater will had found its target. The golden star. They say it came from the void between stars, carried on cosmic winds that predated the world itself. A golden star, gleaming with unearthly radiance, fell from the heavens and struck the lands between with the force of divine intention. Within that star lay something that would reshape reality itself. Not a god precisely, though it would become the instrument of one. Not a weapon, though it would be wielded as such. The Elden Beast, vassal of the greater will, had arrived. The Elden Beast was order made manifest, the very concept of law given physical form. It was the living incarnation of the Elden Ring, that mystical construct which would define the rules by which all things must exist. The greater will had not sent an army or a prophet. It had sent the rules themselves and commanded that reality conform. The great tree, that primordial vessel of the crucible, became something else. The Erdtree, magnificent, golden, terrible in its beauty, erupted from the earth and stretched toward the heavens. Its roots burrowed deep into the world, spreading through caverns and catacombs, through underground rivers and forgotten cities, binding everything together in a network of divine power. Where the crucible had allowed chaos, the Erdtree demanded order. Where the crucible had blended all things together, the Erdtree separated them into distinct categories, each with their place, their purpose, their station. But the greater will needed more than a tree. It needed a vessel, a god to inhabit the Elden Ring, to wield its power, to enforce its will upon the world. Enter the Numen. They came from beyond the lands between, these long-lived people with skin pale as moonlight and eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. The Numen were not natives of this realm, but seekers, drawn by the power of the crucible, by the promise of something ancient and mighty. Among them walked a woman of uncommon grace and ambition, chosen by forces beyond mortal comprehension to be the vessel of a god. Her name was Marika. When the Elden Beast selected Marika as its vessel, when the Elden Ring was placed within her very being, she ceased to be merely mortal. She became Queen Marika the Eternal, goddess and sovereign of the lands between, keeper of the Golden Order, mother of demigods, architect of an age. But godhood comes with a price. The Elden Ring within her was not merely power, it was law itself. Each rune that comprised it represented a fundamental aspect of existence. Life, death, order, the natural cycles that governed all things. By wielding the ring, Marika could rewrite these laws, reshape reality according to her will or the will of the greater will she served. One of her first acts would define the age of the Erdtree more than any other. She removed the rune of death from the Elden Ring entirely. Death, that final ending, that ultimate equalizer, would have no place in her golden order. Or rather, it would have a place, locked away, hidden, controlled, she entrusted this most dangerous of runes to her shadow, Malekith the Black Blade, a half-beast warrior bound to her by forces beyond loyalty or love. Malekith took the rune of death and sealed it within his own flesh, binding it to himself so completely that to steal it would require tearing it from his very essence. With death sealed away, the world changed. No longer would mortals fade into oblivion. Instead, upon what would have been their end, their spirits would return to the Erdtree, absorbed into its roots, recycled and reborn in an endless cycle. Immortality of a sort, though not the kind most would wish for. Those who died were denied true rest, their essence becoming fuel for the Erdtree itself, feeding the greater will's power. But Marika was not alone in this new order. A god, according to the designs of the outer gods, requires a consort, an Elden Lord to stand beside them to enforce their will, to conquer in their name. Marika chose a warrior, a champion of unmatched prowess, a man whose strength was legendary even in that age of legends. His name was Huara Lu, a savage fighter from the Badlands, more beast than man in battle, who wore the lion as his crest and fought with the fury of a storm. When Marika took him as her consort, she stripped away his savage nature, or rather, she bound it within him, taming it. She gave him a regent, Sarosh, the aged lord of beasts, who clung to his back and restrained his bloodlust. She renamed him Godfrey, first Elden Lord, and together they would forge the Golden Order through conquest and war. Their union bore fruit. 3 children, the first of the demigods, were born to Marika and Godfrey. The firstborn was Godwyn, called the Golden, and in him the promise of the Golden Order seemed to shine most brightly. Beautiful, noble, mighty, in both arms and spirit, Godwyn would become the symbol of all that Marika hoped to create. But the twins that followed carried darker omens. Morgoth and Mog, born with the curse of horns sprouting from their flesh, with the twisted features that marked them as omens. In the age of the Crucible, such marks would have been signs of divinity, proof of the Crucible's blessing. But in Marika's Golden Order, they were aberrations to be hidden away, sources of shame for a goddess who demanded perfection. Morgoth and Mog were locked beneath the capital, raised in darkness and chains, their existence kept secret from all but a trusted few. They were princes of the realm, sons of a goddess, and yet they were treated as monsters, as living refutations of everything the Golden Order claimed to represent. This hypocrisy, this fundamental contradiction, would echo through the ages to come. The Golden Order preached perfection and grace, yet it was built upon the suffering of those deemed imperfect. It promised eternal life, yet that life was often worse than any death. It claimed to bring order, yet it was forged through wars of extermination. And those wars were about to begin in earnest. The wars of conquest. Marika's vision of the Golden Order was absolute. There could be no competing powers, no rival faiths, no kingdoms that did not bend the knee to the Erdtree. The lands between would be united under her rule, or it would be crushed. Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, became the instrument of this vision. At the head of vast armies, with the Crucible Knights forming his elite guard, he marched forth to bring the entire world under the Erdtree's shadow. These were not wars of defense or necessity. They were wars of annihilation, meant to scour away any trace of the old world and replace it with Marika's new order. The first great war was waged against the Storm Lord and his people in the distant lands. We know little of this conflict, save that it ended in the Storm Lord's defeat and the scattering of his armies. Some of his warriors would survive, scattered to the far corners of the world, becoming the banished knights that would later serve various lords and causes. But their kingdom was destroyed, their god defeated, their way of life erased. Then came the war that would define an age, the war against the giants. In the north, atop the frozen peaks that scraped the sky, there lived a race of beings who predated even the Erdtree. The fire giants, towering beings of immense power, were the last inheritors of the fell god's flame. This was no ordinary fire. The flame of ruin, as it came to be called, burned with a power that could threaten even the Erdtree itself. It was one of the few forces in existence capable of reducing that mighty tree to ash. The greater will recognized the threat. Marika recognized the threat. And so Godfrey was commanded to take his armies north and exterminate the giants down to the last. The war was brutal beyond measure. The giants were not easily defeated. Each one was a titan, capable of calling down fire from the heavens, of crushing armies beneath their tread. But Godfrey's forces were relentless. The Zamor Knights, ancient warriors clad in armor of ice and snow, joined the campaign. The trolls, distant cousins of the giants, betrayed their own kin and fought for the Golden Order, though history would not look kindly upon their treachery. Among the forces fighting in this war was a champion with hair as red as blood, a curse inherited from his participation in the conflict. His name was Radagon, and though he was not yet widely known, he would soon play a role as pivotal as any gods. The war ended as Marika intended, with genocide. The giants were slaughtered almost to the last. Their forges were destroyed, their culture obliterated, their very existence nearly erased from history. But one giant remained, cursed by Marika herself, to guard the flame of ruin for all eternity. She could not extinguish the flame. It was too primal, too powerful. But she could imprison it, bind it, ensure it would never threaten her order again. The fire giant stands there still, atop the frozen peak, the last of his kind, condemned to an eternity of isolation and grief, forced to guard the very flame that could avenge his people, but which he is sworn never to use. But even as the war against the giants raged, other conflicts erupted. The ancient dragons, those lords of the Crucible's age, did not willingly accept the Erdtree's dominance. They rose in fury, led by Grandsax, greatest of their kind, and laid siege to Leyndell, the royal capital itself. The dragons were not like the giants. They were beings of pure elemental fury, their scales harder than any stone, their breath capable of melting fortresses. When Grandsax descended upon Leyndell, even the golden walls of the capital trembled. It was Godwyn the Golden who turned the tide. Marika's firstborn, the perfect prince, met the dragons in battle, and through a combination of might and diplomacy, he did what seemed impossible. He befriended them. Or at least he befriended Fortisax, one of their greatest warriors. Through this friendship, through respect earned in battle, a peace was brokered. The age of dragon worship began, with the dragon's power folded into the Golden Order rather than destroyed. Grandsax's body would remain impaled upon the capital for ages to come, a warning to all who might consider defying the Erdtree. But the dragons were not exterminated as the giants had been. They were absorbed, their ancient power integrated into the new order through incantations and prayer. Yet another war loomed, this one more subtle, more complex. To the west, in the land of lakes and moonlight, stood the Academy of Raya Lucaria, ruled by Queen Renala of the Carian royal family. The glintstone sorcerers of Lucaria practiced magic that drew power not from the Erdtree but from the stars themselves, from the cold moon that hung in the sky. They represented a different path, a different kind of power. Marika declared war on Liurnia, determined to bring even the sorcerers under her rule. But this war would not end as the others had. The forces of Raya Lucaria, led by Renala and her Carian knights, were formidable. The glintstone sorceries could tear apart armies, and the Carian royal family's own moon-based magic was a match for even the Golden Order's might. Twice, the Golden Host marched against Liurnia. Twice the war ended in stalemate, with neither side able to claim victory. The champion leading Marika's forces, that red-haired warrior named Radagon, found himself locked in an endless conflict with an enemy he could not defeat through force alone. So Radagon tried something different. At the Church of Vows, he performed a ritual using celestial dew, a sacred water that could wash away sin and allow for reconciliation. He renounced his aggression, sued for peace, and in a move that would reshape the future, he married Renala. The war ended not with conquest, but with alliance, sealed through matrimony. Radagon and Renala had 3 children: Radan, who would grow to become a mighty general, Rykard, who would become praetor of the capital, and Rani, a daughter chosen by the Two Fingers themselves as an Empyrean, a potential successor to Marika as vessel of the Elden Ring. For a time, there was peace. The Golden Order seemed complete, its dominion unchallenged. Godfrey's campaigns had subdued or destroyed every rival power. The lands between knelt before the Erdtree. But something was stirring in Marika's heart. Some dissatisfaction, some doubt that would eventually grow into rebellion. The first hint came when she did something inexplicable. She stripped Godfrey and his warriors of their grace. The blessing of gold that had marked them as chosen, the divine radiance that had empowered them. Marika took it all away. Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, the mighty warrior who had conquered a world in her name, was cast out, made tarnished, banished from the lands between, to wander in distant lands, to struggle and die far from the Erdtree's light. My lord and thy warriors, Marika proclaimed, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die. But even in this exile, Marika made a promise. Then after thy death I will give back what I once claimed. Return to the lands between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring. It was a strange command, full of implications. Was Marika already planning her betrayal of the greater will? Was she preparing contingencies, ensuring that when the time came there would be warriors hardened by struggle, tempered by death, ready to return and claim what she would eventually shatter? Godfrey went into exile, stripping away even the name Marika had given him, returning to his true identity as Huara Lu. He would wander the Badlands, fighting in endless conflicts, until death finally claimed him. And there he would wait, in the space beyond death, for the call to return. With Godfrey gone, Marika needed a new consort, and she chose Radagon. The very champion who had married Rennala was summoned back to Leyndell to become Marika's king consort and second Elden Lord. This abandonment shattered Rennala. The great queen, mighty sorceress, became a broken thing clutching the amber egg Radagon had left her, locked in the Grand Library, attempting again and again to create new life through rebirth, only to produce misbegotten abominations. Her academy fell into decay, her students lost without her guidance. But Radagon and Rennala's 3 children, Radon, Rykard, and Rani, were elevated to the status of Marika's stepchildren. They became demigods in their own right, inheritors of divine power and tragic fates. And Marika and Radagon had children of their own. Twins, as is often the case with births of power and significance. Miquella and Millennia, the twin prodigies, born with the potential to surpass even their parents. But the children of a single god, for Radagon and Marika, were revealed to be 2 halves of the same being, are cursed. Millennia was afflicted with the scarlet rot from birth, a disease that consumed her from within, an outer god's touch that could never be fully purged. Miquella was cursed with eternal youth, forever trapped in a child's body, unable to grow, unable to mature, unable to reach the full potential of his power. The Golden Order was complete. The world was at peace, or at least the peace of absolute dominion. Marika ruled supreme. The Elden Ring shone within her, and the Erdtree stood as testament to the greater will's power. But seeds of rebellion had been planted in the hearts of the cursed twins, in the exiled Godfrey, in the abandoned Rennala, in the imprisoned Omen brothers, in the daughter who would dare to defy the 2 fingers themselves. Across the lands between, in the souls of those who suffered under the Golden Order's perfect rule, something dark and defiant was growing. The age of peace was ending. The age of betrayal was about to begin. And it would start on a cold night when death, that forbidden concept, would return to a world that had forgotten what it meant to truly die. Part 2. The Night of Black Knives. The plot. The Night of Black Knives did not emerge from nowhere. It was not random violence or chaos. It was orchestration, careful planning, and the culmination of years, perhaps decades, of secret preparation. At its center was Ranni the Witch, daughter of Radagon and Rennala, stepdaughter of Marika, and one of the 3 Empyreans chosen by the Two Fingers to potentially succeed Marika as vessel of the Elden Ring. But Ranni did not want this fate. She looked at what godhood had done to her stepmother, at the cage of divine responsibility, at the way the greater will used its chosen vessels as puppets to enforce its will. She saw the Two Fingers, those grotesque appendages that claimed to speak for the greater will, and she recognized them for what they were: jailers, not guides. Ranni wanted freedom, not just for herself, but for the world. She envisioned an age free from the direct interference of the outer gods, where the stars could move again, where fate was not predetermined by cosmic entities, but chosen by those who lived under that sky. To achieve this, she needed to do something impossible. She needed to die, but only partially. She needed to shed her Empyrean flesh, that body marked and claimed by the greater will while keeping her spirit intact. But such a thing had never been done. In a world where death had been sealed away, how does one choose to die while preserving consciousness? The answer lay in the one power that had been locked away since Marika's rise: the Rune of Death. Ranni began her plot with a theft. She somehow infiltrated Farum Azula, that crumbling city beyond time where Malekith the Black Blade kept eternal vigil over the Rune of Death, sealed in his flesh. The exact means of this theft remain unclear. Perhaps she used ancient sorcery. Perhaps she had help from her mentor, Renna the Snow Witch. Perhaps she found some weakness in Malekith's eternal guard, and whatever the method, she succeeded. She stole a fragment. Not the whole rune, for that would have been impossible, but a fragment. Just enough to kill, if used with precision and intent. Next, she needed killers. Assassins who could be trusted with such a monumental task, who possessed the skill to kill a demigod, who could move unseen through even the royal capital's defenses. The Black Knife assassins were all women, all Newman like Marika herself, all from the eternal cities that lay deep underground. These were not random killers, but elite warriors, and they were, according to whispered rumors, close to Marika herself. Whether Marika knew of their involvement, whether she tacitly approved, whether she actively participated in the plot, these questions haunt the Night of Black Knives like ghosts. Ranni performed a fearsome ritual, imbuing the Black Knife assassin's daggers with the stolen fragment of the Rune of Death. These were not ordinary weapons anymore. They carried destined death itself in their edges, the power to kill what should be immortal, to end what should be eternal. But for Ranni's plan to work, 2 deaths would need to occur simultaneously. Her spirit could not die, but her body must. Someone else's spirit must die while their body lived. The curse mark of death, which should have formed a complete circle, would be split between two beings, half to each, neither truly dead, neither truly alive. Who would be the other? Did Ranni choose Godwyn the Golden deliberately, or was that Marika's decision? Did Ranni know that the firstborn of the Golden lineage would be the target, or did she care only that someone would die in soul as she died in flesh? The questions remain unanswered, deliberately obscured by those who know the truth. Before the night of the assassination, Ranni took one final precaution. She gave her brother Rykard a gift, the blasphemous claw, a weapon created from the rune of death's power. If something went wrong, if Malekith came seeking vengeance, Rykard would have a tool capable of challenging the Black Blade himself. It was insurance, a final, desperate measure if the plot was discovered before it could complete. The stage was set. The assassins prepared. The cursed blades were ready. And on a cold, dark night of winter fog, the black knives moved. The assassination. They came like shadows, these women of the eternal cities. Their armor was silver beneath cloaks, enchanted to fool the eye, making them nearly invisible in darkness and mist. Their footsteps made no sound. Their presence barely disturbed the air itself. The Black Knife assassins entered Leyndell, the royal capital, penetrating defenses that should have been impenetrable. They moved through the Golden City like ghosts, past guards who never saw them, through wards that never triggered until they reached their target. Godwyn the Golden, firstborn of Marika, prince of the realm, beloved by all, defender of the Erdtree, friend to dragons, was in the capital that night. Perhaps he was unprepared for treachery from within his own family. Perhaps in his nobility, he could not imagine that anyone would dare strike at the heart of the Golden Order itself. The assassins surrounded him, their black knives still cold with the power of destined death, struck without mercy. We can only imagine his final moments. Confusion, pain, the realization that he was dying, truly dying, in a world where death had been forbidden. But the Black Knives did not simply kill Godwyn. They carved something into his flesh as he died. The curse mark of death, a symbol of profound mystical significance, was etched into his body even as his life fled. At that same instant, hundreds of miles away, atop one of the tallest towers in Liurnia, Ranni the Witch knelt alone. She had prepared herself for this moment, steeled her spirit for what must come. As Godwyn's soul was killed in Leyndell, Ranni took her own life, ending her physical form. The curse mark of death split, half manifested on Godwyn's corpse, half appeared on Ranni's discarded body. Neither death was complete. Godwyn's body lived on, animated by some terrible half-life, but his soul was gone, utterly destroyed. Ranni's body died, but her soul persisted, transferring itself into a doll she had prepared, a puppet made in the image of her old mentor, Renna. The first demigod had died. In all the long years since Marika had sealed away the rune of death, no being of divine blood had perished. Now suddenly, shockingly, death had returned to the lands between. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The aftermath. The Black Knives fled the capital. In their escape, one of their number, Tai Chi, daughter of Alecto who led the assassins, was killed protecting her mother. The others scattered across the lands between, some going into hiding, others stationed at strategic locations, all attempting to disappear before Marika's wrath could find them. Alecto, the ringleader, was captured and imprisoned in an Evergall, a mystical prison on the Moonlight Altar in Liurnia. Whether this was Marika's justice or something else remains unclear. Some believe Rani herself imprisoned Alecto to prevent the assassin from revealing the full scope of the plot. Godwin's body was given an Erdtree burial, placed at the deep root depths where the roots of the great tree burrow deepest into the world. But without a soul, his body could not be absorbed into the Erdtree as was proper. Instead, it began to corrupt, to decay, to transform into something monstrous. The death in Godwin's body, that fragment of the rune of death that had killed his soul, spread through the root network of the Erdtree like a disease. Everywhere the roots touched, death began to manifest. Death roots sprouted from the earth, black and twisted. And from that spreading corruption emerged a new horror. Those who live in death. These were beings neither alive nor dead, corpses animated by the touch of destined death, existing in a state that should not be possible. They were anathema to the Golden Order, living proof that Marika's perfect system could be broken. The Golden Order would hunt them relentlessly, branding them abominations, but no amount of hunting could stop the spread. Godwin himself became the Prince of Death, a terrible parody of the Golden Prince he had been. His body, unable to die, grew and mutated, spreading through the roots of the Erdtree like a cancer. His face, once beautiful, became something alien and grotesque, with eyes that had withered into empty sockets, but which still seemed to see everything. The implications were staggering. If a demigod could die, if one of Marika's own children could be killed, then the Golden Order was not inviolate. The Erdtree was not invincible. The age of security and certainty was over. Marika's response to her son's death remains one of the great mysteries. What we know is that shortly after the Night of Black Knives, she took an action that would define all that followed. Whether it was grief, rage, calculation, or some combination of all three, what Marika did next shattered the world. She destroyed the Elden Ring. Using the very hammer she had wielded to forge her reign, Marika shattered the Elden Ring into fragments. The laws of reality themselves broke. The runes that defined existence scattered, each one a piece of divine power now separated from the whole. Why did she do this? Multiple theories abound. Perhaps it was vengeance against the greater will for allowing her son to die. Perhaps it was the culmination of a long brewing rebellion, and Godwin's death was the final push she needed. Perhaps she sought to free the world from the greater will's control entirely. Perhaps she had been planning this all along, and the Night of Black Knives was part of her design. Or perhaps, as some suspect, she had actually orchestrated the Night of Black Knives herself, using the Black Knife assassins, women close to her of her own race, to create the crisis that would justify shattering the ring. What we know for certain is that the moment she broke the ring, Radagon, her consort, her other self, tried to stop her. Using the same hammer, he attempted to repair what she had broken, but he failed. The Elden Ring was too fractured, the pieces too scattered. The Greater Will, or the Elden Beast, acting as its avatar, punished them both. Marika and Radagon were crucified together upon a rune arc within the Erdtree itself, imprisoned in their own seat of power. The Erdtree became their cage, impenetrable thorns growing around it, sealing them away from the world they had ruled. But the damage was done. The great runes, those fragments of the Elden Ring, had fallen to earth, and Marika's children, the demigods, each claimed one of these runes. Power beyond imagining, fragments of divine law itself, were now in the hands of beings who had just witnessed their mother shatter reality and their sibling die, despite supposedly being immortal. The demigods looked at each other and saw rivals. Each possessed a great rune. Each could claim the power to become the next Elden Lord, to repair the ring, to rule the lands between. Each had their own vision of what the world should be. And so began the Shattering. A war that would make all previous conflicts seem like mere skirmishes. A war between gods for the fragments of God's power. A war that would devastate the lands between and leave it a broken, corrupted shell of its former glory. The Golden Age was over. The Age of Ruin had begun. Part 3, The Shattering. The Demigods Divide. When the great runes fell from the broken Elden Ring, they did not scatter randomly. They were drawn to power, to those of divine blood, to Marika's children. Each demigod who claimed a great rune found themselves transformed by it, empowered beyond measure, but also corrupted, driven to obsession and madness. The Shattering was not a single war, but countless conflicts. A web of betrayals and alliances that shifted like sand, with each demigod pursuing their own vision of what the world should become. Morgott and Mog, the twin omens, who had been imprisoned beneath the capital since birth, emerged from their darkness. Morgott, despite his curse and his suffering, remained loyal to the Erdtree. He took the name Morgott the Grace Given and defended Leyndell against all attackers, believing that the Golden Order could still be preserved despite its shattering. His brother Mog took a different path, embracing the curse that marked him, seeking out the power of the formless mother, an outer god of blood, and founding his own dynasty in the dark places beneath the earth. Rykard, the praetor, husband of Tanith, and lord of Volcano Manor, went to war against the Erdtree alongside his blasphemous knights. In his pursuit of power that could challenge even gods, he allowed himself to be devoured by the god-devouring serpent, merging his flesh with the ancient creature. He became something neither man nor beast, proclaiming that together they would devour the very gods themselves. Ranni, having shed her flesh on the Night of Black Knives, cast aside her great rune and disappeared from the conflict entirely. She had her own plans, her own path to godhood, that rejected the Elden Ring and the greater will entirely. Radon, the mightiest warrior among the demigods, claimed his great rune and held the Red Mane Castle in Caelid. He had learned gravity magic in his youth to keep riding his beloved horse Leonard despite his immense size, and he had mastered it to such a degree that he could hold the very stars in place, preventing their movement, controlling fate itself through sheer force of will. And then there were the twins, Michaela and Millennia, cursed from birth, inseparable, devoted to each other above all else. Michaela sought to break the curses that afflicted both himself and his sister. He rejected the Golden Order's fundamentalism, recognizing that it had no answers for their suffering. He created a new kind of magic. Unalloyed gold, free from the influence of outer gods, pure and resistant to their corruption. He planted the Erdtree, his own version of the Erdtree, watering it with his own blood, hoping it would grow into something that could rival the greater will's tree and provide sanctuary for all those who suffered under the Golden Order. Millennia became her brother's blade, his protector, the undefeated swordswoman who would fight any battle in his name. Despite the scarlet rot consuming her from within, despite losing her eyes and limbs to its spread, she trained herself to perfection, wielding a blade with such skill that no warrior in the lands between could defeat her in honest combat. These, then, were the players in the Shattering, each driven by their own motivations, each wielding terrible power, each believing they fought for a better world. The wars began. The battles. The first defense of Leyndell saw the royal capital besieged by a coalition of forces. Godric, who would later be called the Grafted, attacked alongside various allies. But Morgott, the accursed omen defending his mother's city, threw back the assault. Bodies piled high, and Godric was defeated, forced to his knees, begging for mercy from the very brother he had sought to destroy. The humiliation would change Godric forever. Denied the strength to rule by right of birth, he would seek it another way, by taking the strength of others. He began grafting, surgically attaching the limbs and body parts of his enemies to himself, creating a monstrous chimera of flesh and metal, spider limbs and dragon heads, all in a desperate attempt to become worthy of the power he thought he deserved. The assault on Volcano Manor saw Leyndell's forces march against Rykard's blasphemous host. The battle was appalling, marked by the squalid and sick fighting for their serpentine lord. The war dragged on with no glory, no honor, only suffering and death. Many of Leyndell's soldiers were afflicted by the frenzied flame during this conflict, driven mad, resorting to cannibalism. Rykard's own forces began to desert him, unable to abide what he had become, but the Erdtree remained unshaken and neither side could claim victory. The second defense of Leyndell was Morgott's finest hour. Again the capital was besieged, again forces sought to claim its treasures and its throne. And again Morgott, the fell omen, threw them back. He stood alone at times against entire armies. His skill with blade and his mastery of Golden Order magic, making him effectively invincible within the capital's walls. The corpses of heroes were stacked high, but the Erdtree remained defended. Yet for all these conflicts, for all the battles and bloodshed, one confrontation overshadowed them all. One battle that would change the very geography of the lands between, and doom two of the mightiest demigods to fates worse than death. It was called the Battle of Aeonia, and it began when Malenia marched south with her clean-wrought knights. The Battle of Aeonia. Malenia's campaign had been one of unbroken victory. She and her clean-wrought knights, warriors who had sworn to fight beside her even as the scarlet rot gradually putrefied their flesh, had marched through the lands, between leaving destruction in their wake. They had crushed Godric's forces in Limgrave, forcing him into his humiliating defeat. They had fought through countless battles, and in every one, Malenia had been untouched, undefeated, her blade dancing through enemies like she was performing a deadly ballet. She marched south for a purpose. Her destination was Caelid, and her target was Star Scourge Radon. Why did Malenia choose to confront Radon? Multiple theories exist. Some say she sought his great rune to add to her brother's collection of power. Some believe Miquella had made a pact with Radon long ago, a promise of consortship that Radon had since refused, and Malenia sought to enforce that vow through violence. Others think she simply recognized that Radon was the only warrior in the lands between who could match her, and that to secure victory in the Shattering, he needed to be eliminated. Whatever her reasons, she came with her army to Caelid, where Radon commanded his Redmane knights and protected the land he loved. Radon was no ordinary warrior. His size alone was immense. A mountain of a man riding his tiny horse, held aloft by gravity magic, so the steed would not be crushed. He wielded two massive swords, and his command of gravitational force allowed him to pull meteors from the sky and hurl them at his enemies. He had held the stars themselves in place, freezing fate itself, preventing Rani's destiny from progressing. When Malenia and her clean-wrought knights met Radon and his Redmanes on the field, it was a clash of titans. The battle raged across the wailing dunes of Caelid. The clean-wrought knights, accepting that the scarlet rot would eventually destroy them, fought with the fervor of the doomed, their acceptance of their fate making them fiercer than any warriors who still clung to hope. Radon's Redmane knights fought to protect their beloved general and their homeland, marking their armor with burns to show their resolve when they witnessed Malenia's power. Great rune met great rune. Unbreakable will met unstoppable force. Malenia's blade flashed in patterns too fast for mortal eyes to follow. Radon's gravitational magic pulled at the earth itself, and when his sword swung, they carried the force of falling stars. They fought to a stalemate. Neither could overcome the other. For all Malenia's skill, Radon's raw power was too great. For all Radon's might, Malenia's technique was too perfect. But Malenia had a last resort. A power she had spent her entire life learning to contain, to suppress, to control. The scarlet rot that consumed her from within was not merely a curse. It was the manifestation of an outer god, the rot god itself, trying to use her as its vessel. Miquella had given her a needle of unalloyed gold to suppress this power, to keep it sealed within her. In the midst of her battle with Radon, that needle broke. Whether it shattered from the force of the conflict, or whether Malenia deliberately destroyed it, we cannot know. But the result was catastrophic. Malenia bloomed into the scarlet Aeonia, a flower of pure rot that exploded across the battlefield. The scarlet rot flooded Caelid in an instant, a wave of corruption that transformed the entire region. The ground turned sick and red. The plants mutated into grotesque fungi. The animals became monsters. The very air became poisonous. The clean rot knights who had survived the battle were either killed by the bloom or infected beyond any hope of recovery. The red mane knights, who weren't killed outright, were driven insane by the rot, their flesh corrupting, their minds crumbling, and Radon himself was infected. The scarlet rot seeped into his flesh, into his mind, but his strength was so great, his great rune so powerful, that he could not die. Instead, he was driven mad, reduced from the mightiest warrior of the age to a beast that wandered the corrupted wasteland, devouring the corpses of friend and foe alike, still holding the stars in place even as his mind crumbled to nothing. Before Radon fell completely, in his last moments of clarity, Malenia whispered something to him. "Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort." Malenia herself, having unleashed the full power of the scarlet rot, fell into a comatose state. Her few surviving knights faced a terrible choice: abandon their lady or attempt the impossible and carry her back to the Erdtree. One knight, Finley, chose the latter. In an act of heroism that defies comprehension, Finley carried the slumbering Malenia across the entire lands between, fighting through every danger, every enemy, every hazard, until she delivered her goddess safely back to the roots of the Erdtree. Finley died from her wounds shortly after, but her deed was complete. Malenia slept beneath the Erdtree, waiting, dreaming of her brother's return. But Miquella would not return. For while Malenia slept, another tragedy befell the cursed twins. The abduction. Miquella had embedded himself within the Erdtree, wrapping himself in a cocoon, attempting to grow beyond his curse of eternal youth. The Erdtree, watered with his blood, nurtured with his power, was meant to allow him to mature, to finally become the god he was meant to be. But the Erdtree was not the Erdtree. It could not support a god's birth. Despite all of Miquella's brilliance, despite all his power, the tree began to fail, its growth stunted, unable to reach the heights necessary for his transformation. While Miquella slumbered in his cocoon, defenseless, Mog, his half-brother, the Lord of Blood, came to the Erdtree. For years, the story was simple. Mog kidnapped Miquella, tore him from his cocoon, and brought him to the Mogwyn Palace to become his consort. Mog, who had been spurned and imprisoned his entire life for being an omen, saw in Miquella a chance to create his own dynasty, to become an Elden Lord to Miquella's god, to finally claim the recognition and power he had been denied. But the truth, as it would later be revealed, was far more complex and terrible. Miquella, the most fearsome Empyrean of all, possessed an ability that few knew about. He could charm others, compel their affection, bend their will to his own. The bewitching branches found throughout the lands between were his creation, tools that turned enemies into allies through unnatural compulsion. Mog was not the kidnapper, he was the victim. Miquella had charmed him, used his obsession, manipulated him into taking Miquella from the Erdtree, because Miquella needed to leave the lands between. He needed to access a place sealed away, a realm that existed in shadow, and Mog, with his connection to the Formless Mother, could provide the means. Mog brought Miquella to his palace beneath the earth. He performed rituals with their mingled blood, attempting to elevate Miquella to godhood, to nurture him to maturity. But Miquella remained slumbering, unresponsive, locked in a dream from which he would not wake. The shattering ground on. The demigods warred and schemed and killed. But with Millennia in her endless sleep, with Radon reduced to a mindless beast, with Miquella taken, with Ranni disappeared, with Rykard merged with his serpent, the war reached a kind of stalemate. No demigod had managed to claim enough power to become Elden Lord. No one had gathered all the great runes. No one had found a way to enter the sealed Erdtree and claim the throne that awaited within. The lands between fell into ruin. The wars had destroyed the infrastructure of civilization. The Golden Order's teachings rang hollow in a world where their goddess was imprisoned and her children devoured each other. The common people suffered, caught between the ambitions of gods who cared nothing for their fate. The greater will, seeing that none of the demigods were worthy, that the Shattering had produced only stalemate and corruption, abandoned them. The gods who had broken the world were left to rot in it. But the greater will was not done with the lands between. It had a contingency plan, one Marika herself had helped to arrange. The Tarnished, Godfrey and his warriors, those who had been stripped of grace and exiled long ago, would be called back. They had lived, died, and been hardened by struggle in lands beyond. Now their eyes would light with grace once more, and they would be guided back to the lands between. The demigods were failures. Perhaps the Tarnished, returned from death, could succeed where the gods had failed. And so the bell tolled, calling the Tarnished home to a broken world, to wage war among the ruins, to claim the great runes, to challenge the demigods, to enter the sealed Erdtree, to become Elden Lord, or to choose a different path entirely. The stage was set for the final act. The age of the Tarnished was about to begin. Part 4. The Tarnished Rises. The Return from Death. Death had always been a temporary inconvenience for the Tarnished, even before the call to return. When Godfrey and his warriors were stripped of grace and exiled, they wandered distant lands, fighting, dying, being reborn, in a cycle far crueler than anything in the lands between. They had no Erdtree to return to, no divine grace to sustain them. They simply refused to stay dead. When the bell tolled and grace returned to their eyes, when they were called back to the lands between, they came. Not all at once, but in a steady trickle of warriors, scholars, and seekers. They awoke in various locations, across the shattered realm, guided by sights of grace. small bonfires that marked safe havens and showed the path forward. Among these tarnished, one stood out. Perhaps they were destined by the greater will. Perhaps they were simply more stubborn, more skilled, more willing to throw themselves against impossible odds until those odds broke. Whatever the reason, this tarnished would change everything. Their journey began in the Chapel of Anticipation, a crumbling structure shrouded in mist, where they faced the grafted Scion, one of Godric's nightmarish creations. The tarnished died there, as was intended, and found themselves reborn in a cave far from the chapel. This was the test. This was the proof that, yes, they could die and return, could learn and grow stronger, could face any challenge, enough times until victory was achieved. From that cave, they emerged into Limgrave, and the true journey began. The journey through ruin. Limgrave was the gentle introduction to a world of horrors, a land of rolling green hills and ruined forts haunted by the tibia mariner that collected the dead, patrolled by the knight's cavalry, and dotted with the bodies of those who had failed before. The Tarnished's first encounter with the demigods came at Stormvile Castle, where Godric the Grafted had retreated after his humiliating defeat during the Shattering. The castle was a maze of traps and grafted horrors. Soldiers turned into multi-limbed abominations, and at its heart sat Godric himself, a pathetic, desperate creature who had grafted so many parts onto himself that he barely resembled anything human. Godric fell. The Tarnished claimed their first great rune and learned a fundamental truth. The demigods were not invincible. They could bleed. They could die. And with each death, their power could be claimed. The journey took them north to Liurnia of the Lakes, where Queen Renala still clutched her amber egg in the Grand Library, attempting again and again to birth new life through rebirth, creating only malformed things that died or fled. When the Tarnished found her, they saw not a threat, but a broken woman, destroyed by Radagon's abandonment. Even in defeating her, there was sadness. Renala was no warrior, no threat, just a scholar, driven mad by loss. But Rani was watching. The witch who had shed her flesh approached the Tarnished with an offer: serve her, and in return she would show them a path that led neither to the Golden Order's restoration, nor to its simple replacement, but to something entirely different. An age of stars, where the greater will's influence would be severed, where the world would be set adrift in the cosmos, free but uncertain. The Tarnished ventured into Caelid, that scarlet wasteland where the Battle of Aeonia had left its mark. Here they found Radon, the mighty star scourge, reduced to a mad beast wandering the dunes. His own soldiers had organized a festival to give their beloved general an honorable death in battle, recognizing that the general they loved was already gone, consumed by the rot. The battle with Radon was epic. Even mad, even corrupted, he retained his strength. He pulled meteors from the sky, his swords cleaved through the earth, but eventually, with the help of warriors gathered for the festival, the Tarnished brought Radon down. And when Radon died, the stars moved. His gravitational magic, which had held fate itself in place, was released. A great meteor fell from the sky, crashing into Liurnia, opening a path to Nokron, the Eternal City, where Rani's quest could continue. From Caelid, the Tarnished traveled to Volcano Manor, where they found the once proud Praetor Rykard merged with the god-devouring serpent, offering them a chance to join his family, to feast upon the gods with him. When they refused and challenged him instead, the battle was unlike any other, fighting a demigod who had become a serpent so large it could swallow men whole, in a chamber of lava where one misstep meant death. In Leyndell, the royal capital, the Tarnished found Morgoth defending the throne room, still loyal to a goddess who had abandoned him, still fighting for an order that had imprisoned him since birth. His was perhaps the most tragic battle, for Morgoth was right. The Tarnished were driven by ambition, by the desire for power. They were no better than the demigods they challenged. And yet they fought him anyway, and they won. And Morgoth died without ever being acknowledged by the mother he had served so faithfully. Each victory brought more questions. Why was the Erdtree sealed by thorns? Why could no one enter to claim the throne? What did the mysterious Melina want when she offered to turn their collected runes into strength? Who really sent the guidance of grace? The answers awaited in the mountaintops of the giants, where the forge of the giants could produce the one flame capable of burning the Erdtree. The flame of ruin that Marika had worked so hard to seal away. The burning? The fire giant, last of his kind, still stood guard at the forge. Cursed by Marika to guard it eternally, he had watched ages pass while his people were erased from history. When the Tarnished came to claim the flame, he fought with the rage of genocide's sole survivor, with the grief of a people exterminated for the crime of being a threat. He fell as all the others had fallen. And with his death, the forge was unsealed. Melina, who had journeyed with the Tarnished since the beginning, who had turned their runes into power, who had shared visions of Marika's words, now revealed her purpose. She would serve as kindling for the flame. She would burn so that the Erdtree could burn, so that the thorns would be cleared, so that the Tarnished could enter and claim their destiny. There are those who tried to stop her, those who found another way through the frenzied flame and allowed their own body to be kindling instead. But one way or another, the fire was lit, and the Erdtree began to burn. The sight was terrible and magnificent. The great golden tree, symbol of the age of fire, the pillar around which an entire civilization had been built, wreathed in flames that turned its golden light to red and orange. The thorns that had sealed it crumbled. The way was open. But there was resistance. Godfrey himself, returned from death as the Tarnished had been, met them at the base of the Erdtree. Huara Lu, the warrior who had been the first Elden Lord, fought them with all his savage might, Sarosh torn from his back, his true nature unleashed. It was a battle between the first Tarnished and the newest, between the beginning of the Golden Order and its potential end. The Tarnished proved stronger. Godfrey fell, and with his last breath seemed almost proud. Perhaps he saw in the Tarnished what he had once been, a warrior willing to do anything to claim victory. The final truth. Inside the Erdtree, at the very heart of the world, the Tarnished found Marika. She was crucified upon a rune arc, impaled and imprisoned, her body merged with Radagon's in a twisted union. The goddess who had ruled for an age was reduced to a broken figure, a prisoner in her own seat of power. As the Tarnished approached, Radagon took control of their shared body. He wielded Marika's hammer against them, fighting to repair what she had broken, to prevent the Tarnished from reaching the Shattered Ring. His attacks were devastating, each swing carrying the force of a god's desperate final stand. But even Radagon was merely a puppet in the end. When he fell, his body transformed, absorbed by the Elden Beast itself. That golden creature, the vassal of the greater will, the living incarnation of order. This was the true final challenge. Not a demigod, not a god, but the concept of order itself made manifest. The battle against the Elden Beast was fought in a space beyond normal reality. In a realm where the creature swam through the air like water, where it wielded the Elden Ring itself as a sword, where every attack carried the weight of cosmic law trying to reassert itself. And yet, through death and rebirth, through countless attempts, through sheer stubborn refusal to accept failure, the Tarnished won. They slew the Elden Beast. They stood before the shattered Elden Ring, now free to be remade according to their will. The choice. Here, at the end of everything, the Tarnished faced a choice that would define the future of the world. They could mend the Elden Ring as it was, restoring the Golden Order, becoming Marika's consort, and continuing the age of the Erdtree. It was the simple path, the one the greater will desired, returning things to how they were before the Shattering. They could mend it with the mending rune of perfect order, creating an order even more absolute than before, eliminating the chaos and uncertainty that had led to the Shattering in the first place. They could use the rune of the Death Prince, returning the rune of death to the Elden Ring, restoring the natural cycle of life and death, allowing those who live in death to finally die properly, ending the tortured existence of countless beings trapped between states. They could become the Lord of Frenzied Flame, unleashing chaos upon the world, burning everything to ash, so that a new world could be born from the ruins. It was destruction absolute, the end of all order, perhaps the end of the greater will's control, but also the end of everything else. Or they could follow Ranni's path. Summon her to the throne, allow her to take the Elden Ring and carry it into the cosmos, severing the connection between the greater will and the lands between entirely. It would be an age of stars, an age of uncertainty, where the world was no longer governed by outer gods, but left to find its own way in the dark between worlds. Each choice carried its own implications, its own philosophy about what the world needed. Each was a statement about whether order or chaos, light or dark, certainty or freedom was the proper path forward. And the Tarnished, who had killed their way through gods and beasts alike, who had seen every corner of the lands between and witnessed the cost of the Golden Order's reign, had to decide. The choice was made. The future was set. But there were still secrets. left to uncover. Beyond the lands between, in a realm that had been sealed away since Marika's ascension, another truth awaited. Part 5. The Shadow of the Erdtree. The land veiled in shadow. There is a place that exists but does not exist, a realm that is part of the lands between, but separated from it by more than mere distance. It is the realm of shadow, a land that was severed from the world when Marika used the divine gate to ascend to godhood, left behind like a discarded past. To reach it, one must pass through the withered arm of Micaiah, found in Mog's palace after his defeat. This desiccated limb, still bearing traces of Michaela's power, serves as a key to a place hidden from sight, to secrets buried deliberately, to a history that Marika tried to erase. When the Tarnished touches the withered arm, they are drawn through the veil between worlds, into the realm of shadow. This is not a small hidden area, but an entire continent, as large as the lands between itself, filled with ruins of civilizations that predated Marika's rise, with the remnants of her vengeance and with the truth of where she came from. The land of shadow is dominated by a structure impossible to miss, the Erdtree, a massive spectral tree that mirrors the Erdtree, but exists in shadow form, marking this place as something separate from the world of light. Around it spread vast plains, ancient forests, ruined cities, and the detritus of a genocide. This is where the Hornsent once ruled, a civilization of tower builders. They were the precursors to the Golden Order, a culture that practiced their own form of divine communion through pain and flesh. They created the living jars, those pot-headed beings found throughout the lands between, by filling earthenware vessels with the remains of warriors, allowing the flesh to congeal into something new, something that carried the strength of all who contributed to it. The Hornsent had enslaved Marika's people, the shamans of the village where she was born. They had used them in cruel experiments, stuffing them into jars, attempting to create some form of perfected being. Marika had witnessed her people's suffering, had seen her friends and family tortured and mutilated in the name of the Hornsent's divine vision. When she ascended to godhood, when the greater will chose her as its vessel, Marika's first act of power was vengeance. She sent a crusade to the land of shadow to exterminate the Hornsent. And at the head of that crusade rode her son, Messmer. Messmer the Impaler. Messmer was another of Marika's children, a son born before the Elden Lord Godfrey, or perhaps alongside Melina, though the exact timeline remains unclear. Like so many of Marika's children, he was cursed from birth. Within him writhed the base serpent, an abyssal creature that sought to consume him from within. To suppress this serpent, Marika sealed it within his eye, giving him power over flame, but also condemning him to constant agony. Messmer loved his mother deeply. When she commanded him to lead the crusade to the realm of shadow, to purge the Hornsent, to enact her vengeance for the suffering of her people, he obeyed without question. He became Messmer the Impaler, and his conquest was absolute. The Hornsent were slaughtered in a genocide that matched or exceeded what Marika had done to the fire giants. Their towers were torn down, their cities burned, their people impaled on stakes as warnings. The few who survived were hunted through the ruins of their civilization, forever hated by Marika's warriors. But once the crusade was complete, Marika did not call Messmer home. She sealed away the land of shadow, trapping him there with his army, with the survivors of his conquest, with the guilt of what he had done. He was abandoned, left to rot in the land he had destroyed, his service rewarded with exile. Why did Marika do this? Perhaps she wanted to hide the evidence of her vengeance, to bury the truth of the Hornsent civilization and what they had done to her people. Perhaps she feared Messmer's power, feared the serpent writhing within him. Or perhaps she simply no longer needed him once the Golden Order was established, and he, like so many of her children, was discarded when his usefulness ended. Messmer remained in the Shadow Realm, building his own fortress, continuing his war against the surviving Hornsent, out of loyalty to a mother who had abandoned him. His soldiers, the Fire Knights who wielded flame and faith in equal measure, served him with the same unwavering devotion he had shown Marika. But Messmer was not the only significant figure in the realm of shadow. Others had found their way to this sealed land. General Raden's friend Gaius, a gravity-wielding warrior of immense skill. R'Lana, sister of Queen Renala, who had come seeking Messmer and stayed to become his sword. And most importantly, Miquella. Miquella's plan. The truth about Miquella's abduction was revealed in the realm of shadow. Mog had not kidnapped him. Miquella had charmed Mog, used him as a tool to escape the lands between and enter this hidden realm. Miquella had needed Mog's connection to the formless mother, had needed the blood magic and the ritual sacrifice to access the Shadow Realm. Because in the Shadow Realm lay the gate of divinity, the same gateway Marika had used to ascend to godhood. And Miquella, cursed with eternal youth, unable to grow in the lands between, sought to use this gate to finally achieve true godhood on his own terms. But godhood required a consort, and Miquella had made a promise long ago to Radahn. The battle between Millennia and Radahn had not been random chance or simple power struggle. It was Miquella's attempt to claim Radahn's soul. When Millennia whispered, "Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort," to the dying Radahn, she was reminding him of their vow. Radahn's resistance to the Scarlet Rot, his refusal to fully die, his madness, all of it had delayed Miquella's plan. But now with Radahn slain by the Tarnished, with Mog's body available as a vessel, Miquella could complete his design. Miquella had shed parts of himself as he traveled through the Shadow Realm. His doubt, his fear, his love, his very self. Piece by piece, he abandoned them, leaving behind crosses that marked where parts of his being had been discarded. He even abandoned Saint Trina, his other half, casting her into the stone coffin fissure to die alone and forgotten. This was the price of godhood, as Miquella understood it. To become a god was to transcend humanity, to shed everything that made him vulnerable, uncertain, weak. Love and compassion would have no place in the god he intended to become. At the gate of divinity, Miquella performed his final ritual. He used Mog's body as a vessel, summoning Radahn's soul and binding it to the flesh of the omen, the promised consort was reborn. Radan, restored to his prime, no longer corrupted by scarlet rot, but wearing Mog's horns as a crown, wielding both Radan's gravitational might and Mog's blood magic. Miquella approached the gate of divinity, ready to ascend, ready to become the god he believed the world needed, a god of compassion enforced through charm, a god who would unite all beings under a spell of affection, whether they willed it or not. But the Tarnished had followed him through the Shadow Realm. They had defeated Mesmer, had learned the truth of Marika's past, had discovered what Miquella had abandoned in his quest for godhood. And at the gate of divinity, as Miquella prepared to ascend with Radan at his side, the Tarnished made a final choice. The final battle. The fight against Miquella and Radan was unlike any that had come before. This was not a mad beast or a corrupted demigod. This was Radan restored to perfection, his strength and skill returned, backed by Miquella's charm and divine power. Every blow carried the weight of gravity magic, capable of moving stars. Every moment risked being caught by Miquella's charm, being compelled to love him, to serve him, to accept his vision. The battle raged at the threshold of godhood itself, in a space where reality bent to Miquella's will, where the rules of engagement were no longer clear. Miquella rode upon Radan's back, supporting his consort with incantations of light, healing wounds, even as the Tarnished inflicted them, granting blessings and protections that made victory seem impossible. But the Tarnished had not come this far to be stopped. Through persistence, through pattern recognition, through the same stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had carried them through every challenge, they began to turn the tide. Sir Ansbach, a follower of Mog, who had resisted Miquella's charm, fought beside the Tarnished, seeking to free his lord from the spell that had doomed him. Tholier, who had followed Saint Trina's guidance, aided in the battle, having learned from Trina herself that Miquella must be stopped, must be killed, for his own sake, if nothing else. When Radan fell for the second time, truly dead now, his promised consort bond broken, Miquella stood alone. The god he had tried to become crumbled before he could complete his ascension. His plan, so carefully crafted, so long in the making, had failed at the final moment. Miquella died, never having overcome his curse. His eternal youth became his eternal end, and with his death, those he had charmed began to wake, to remember, to realize what had been done to them. The truth revealed. In the aftermath, as the Tarnished stood in the realm of shadow, surrounded by the ruins of Marika's vengeance and Miquella's ambition, certain truths became clear. The Golden Order had never been about perfection or benevolence. It had been built on genocide, on the suppression of anything that didn't fit Marika's vision, on the imprisonment and abandonment of her own children when they proved inconvenient. Marika herself had been a victim, her people tortured by the horn scent, but she had become a tyrant in turn, visiting upon others the same cruelty that had been inflicted on her. The greater will was not absent or uncaring. It had simply finished its work. It had imposed order on the lands between. What came after the Shattering and all its horrors were the consequences of beings trying to break or reshape that order according to their own desires. And the Tarnished, who had killed their way through demigods and gods alike, who had been guided by grace to restore the Elden Ring, were themselves just another pawn in an endless game of cosmic manipulation. But perhaps, armed with this knowledge, with the truth of the world's origins and the cost of its order, the Tarnished could make a different choice. Perhaps the future need not repeat the past. Perhaps the cycle could be broken. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the nature of power, of godhood, of order itself, was such that it always demanded the same sacrifices, always created the same victims, always led to the same betrayals and tragedies. The answer would depend on which ending the Tarnished had chosen, which vision of the future they had enacted. Conclusion: the shattered legacy. Reflections on broken gods. Stand at the base of the Erdtree, that magnificent golden monument to hubris and hope, and consider what it represents. It is beautiful, undeniably so. Its roots stretch through the entire world, connecting all things, sustaining all life. Its light guided generations. Its grace promised redemption and purpose. But that beauty was purchased with genocide. That light was fueled by the absorbed souls of the dead, denied true rest. That grace was a leash, binding mortals to the will of a goddess, who herself was bound to the will of an outer god that cared nothing for individual suffering. The story of Elden Ring is, at its core, a story about the cost of order, about what is sacrificed in the name of perfection, about the difference between the world as it is presented and the world as it truly is. Marika ascended to godhood, carrying the trauma of her people's torture. She built her golden order on the ruins of the Horn sent her son to commit genocide in her name, then abandoned him to his guilt. She imprisoned her omen sons for the crime of their birth. She manipulated her consorts and discarded them when convenient. She shattered the very thing she had sworn to protect when it no longer served her purposes. Was she a victim who became a monster? Or was she always calculating, always willing to do whatever was necessary to achieve and maintain power? Perhaps the answer is both, and that's what makes her tragic. She never escaped the cycle of abuse, only perpetuated it with herself in the dominant position. Her children inherited her tragedy and amplified it. Godwyn, who seemed the brightest hope, was killed as a pawn in someone else's plot. Morgott remained loyal to a system that had imprisoned him since birth, dying in service to a goddess who never acknowledged his devotion. Mog sought to build his own dynasty, but was used as a tool and discarded. Rykard tried to gain enough power to challenge even gods, and lost himself becoming a monster. Ranni rejected her destiny entirely, willing to let the world drift in darkness rather than accept the greater will's yoke. And the twins, Miquella and Malenia, perhaps showed the greatest potential and the greatest tragedy. Malenia became an undefeated warrior, but sacrificed her body to rot and her brother to sleep. Miquella sought to save everyone, to break every curse, to create a world of compassion. But in the end, he abandoned his own compassion, his own love, his very self, in pursuit of godhood, becoming the very thing he had sought to prevent. What does it mean that even the kindest, most well-intentioned of the demigods had to abandon his kindness and intentions to achieve his goals? What does that say about the nature of divine power in this world? The Tarnished's journey through this wreckage reveals that there are no heroes in the traditional sense. Every faction is right about something and wrong about something else. The Golden Order brought stability, but at the cost of freedom and natural death. The dragon cult worshipped beings of noble power, but those dragons had themselves been lords over others. Rani offers freedom from the greater will, but her age of stars is cold and uncertain, offering no guarantees of happiness. Even the endings reflect this ambiguity. Mending the Elden Ring restores order, but also restores the same system that led to the Shattering. The Age of the Duskborn returns death, but doesn't address the other problems of the Golden Order. The Lord of Frenzied Flame burns everything, which might break the cycle, but only by destroying all life in the process. Rani's Age of Stars offers freedom, but leaves the world without divine guidance, for better or worse. There is no perfect answer. There is no path that leads to unambiguous good. Every choice trades one set of problems for another. The nature of power and curse. One of the most striking patterns in Elden Ring's lore is how every form of divine power comes with a curse, and every curse is actually a form of power that the Golden Order could not control. Marika's omen sons bear horns that mark them as cursed. But those horns are remnants of the Crucible, signs of the primordial power that predated the Erdtree. The Golden Order declared them cursed not because they were weak, but because they represented something the Order could not fully subsume. Millennia's scarlet rot is described as a curse, an affliction to be cured, but it's also the power of an outer god, capable of destroying entire regions, of defeating the mightiest warrior in the lands between. Miquella spent his life trying to cure his sister, but that cure would have meant removing her greatest source of power. Miquella's own curse of eternal youth prevented him from becoming a god through normal means, but it also protected him from the corrupting influence of full divine power until he was ready. The curse was also a blessing, and overcoming it required him to discard the very qualities that made him worth following. This pattern extends throughout the world. The Tarnished are cursed to be without grace, until that very curse becomes their path to power, when grace is restored. Those who live in death are abominations to the Golden Order, but they also represent freedom from the Erdtree's cycle of absorption and rebirth. The message seems clear. What we call curse and blessing depends on perspective. Power always demands sacrifice. There is no strength without cost, no transformation without loss, no ascension without abandoning something fundamental. The cycle of betrayal. Perhaps the most fundamental tragedy of the lands between is that every age ends in betrayal, and every new age is built on that betrayal. Marika betrayed the Hornsent who had enslaved her people, rising to godhood and sending a crusade to exterminate them. The Erdtree betrayed or subsumed the crucible, declaring its primordial chaos to be impure. Marika betrayed Godfrey, stripping his grace and exiling him. Radagon betrayed Renala, abandoning her to return to Marika's side. Ranni betrayed the Two Fingers and orchestrated Godwyn's death to free herself. Marika betrayed the Greater Will by shattering the Elden Ring. The demigods betrayed each other in the Shattering. Miquella betrayed Mog, Saint Trina, and ultimately himself. Every major character is both betrayer and betrayed. Marika was tortured by the horn scent before she tormented her own children. Godfrey was exiled after conquering a world for his goddess. Radan was promised as a consort, then infected with rot. Mog thought he was building a dynasty, but was being manipulated. The Tarnished, too, is part of this cycle. Every demigod we fight is someone we betray by taking their power. Every ally we help is being used for our own purposes. Melina's sacrifice, whether we allow it or prevent it, is a betrayal either of her or of the flame she sought to be. And yet, awareness of this cycle is perhaps the first step to breaking it. If we understand that divine power demands betrayal, that every age built on order requires the suppression of chaos, that every ascension requires a discarding of humanity, then maybe we can choose differently. Maybe. The horror of immortality. One of the subtler horrors of Elden Ring is what Marika's removal of the Rune of Death actually meant for the people of the lands between. Immortality sounds like a blessing, but the immortality offered by the Erdtree was not true eternal life. When people died, their souls were absorbed into the tree, losing their individual identity, becoming fuel for the Greater Will's power. They would be reborn, perhaps, but not as themselves. The person they were would be gone, dissolved into the collective, their experiences and memories erased. For those who remained alive, immortality meant endless suffering. The wounded could not escape their pain through death. The enslaved could not escape their bondage. The cursed could not escape their afflictions. The world became a prison where death, the ultimate escape, had been denied. When Godwyn was killed and those who live in death began to emerge, the Golden Order treated them as abominations. But from another perspective, they were freedom, beings who had escaped the Erdtree's cycle of consumption, who existed outside the Greater Will's system. Yes, they were undead, caught in a twilight state, but they were their own, not absorbed into something larger. The Tarnished, by being stripped of grace and exiled, also escaped this fate. They died true deaths in foreign lands, experienced genuine mortality, and were changed by it. When they returned, they brought with them the understanding of what it meant to truly die. And that understanding made them more fully alive than any of the immortal demigods. Perhaps this is why the Tarnished succeed where the demigods failed. The demigods never learned the value of mortality, never understood sacrifice, never grasped that some things are worth dying for. They fought to preserve themselves, their power, their immortality. The Tarnished fought with the knowledge that death was always possible, always near, and that made them willing to take risks, The demigods never could. What the lore teaches us. The story of Elden Ring, in all its complexity and tragedy, offers several lessons about power, order, and the cost of both. First, order imposed from above, without regard for what it suppresses, will always breed resentment and rebellion. The greater will's order was absolute, perfect in its design, but it left no room for chaos, for growth, for the messy reality of life. Those who didn't fit were imprisoned or eliminated. Eventually, even Marika herself, the vessel of order, rebelled against it. Second, good intentions are not enough. Miquella sought to create a gentle world, free from the cruelty of the Golden Order. He researched cures for curses, created refuges for the oppressed, pursued paths that might break the influence of outer gods. But his methods required manipulation and compulsion. His compassion became controlling. His desire to save everyone led him to take away their choice. Third, the past cannot be buried. Marika tried to hide her origins, sealed away the realm of shadow, abandoned Mesmer and the evidence of her vengeance, but the past always emerges. The Horn-Scent's suffering echoed through the Omen curse. The torture jars of their civilization remain scattered throughout the lands between. The truth, however deeply buried, would eventually surface. Fourth, power demands sacrifice, and the powerful rarely sacrifice themselves. The Golden Order demanded sacrifice from the Omens, from the Misbegotten, from the Albinaurics, from anyone deemed imperfect. The wars of conquest demanded sacrifice from soldiers and civilians. Even Marika's ascension likely required sacrifice we're not fully told about. But the gods themselves, the powerful demigods, they sacrificed others, not themselves, until forced to. And finally, there are no perfect solutions. Every ending in Elden Ring is ambiguous because life is ambiguous. Order and chaos, light and dark, grace and flame, none of these is purely good or evil. Each represents different values, different priorities, different visions of what matters most. The player must choose based on their own judgment, their own values. And that's appropriate. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Look at the complexity of the world, at the impossibility of perfect solutions, and choose what we believe is right, while accepting that others might reasonably disagree. The lands between eternal. The lands between will continue in whatever form the Tarnished's choice has given it. A new age will dawn, with new rules, new gods, perhaps new cycles to eventually be broken by new heroes or new tragedies. The Erdtree may burn to ash and regrow. The stars may move freely again. Death may return or remain sealed. The greater will's influence may persist or be severed. The world may be remade in fire or remain in broken gold or drift into cosmic darkness. But the fundamental questions will remain. How do we balance order and freedom? When is power justified, and when does it become tyranny? Can good be achieved through force, or does force always corrupt the good? What do we owe to the past, to those who came before, to the world we inherited? And what do we owe to the future, to those who will inherit what we leave behind? Marika wrestled with these questions and found no answers that didn't demand terrible sacrifice. Her children pursued different answers and destroyed themselves and each other in the process. The Tarnished stands at the end of that cycle of tragedy, empowered to choose, but also burdened with the knowledge of what every choice costs. And perhaps that's the point. Perhaps Elden Ring's story is not meant to provide answers, but to illustrate the questions, to show us what power looks like from the inside, what it costs, what it demands, what it destroys, to demonstrate that even gods are trapped by circumstances, by past traumas, by the systems they inherit and perpetuate. The shattered ring can be mended. The world can be remade, but the scars will remain. The dead will stay dead. The price already paid cannot be refunded. All we can do is move forward, carrying the weight of history, making the best choices we can with incomplete information and imperfect understanding, hoping that our intentions, however they might be corrupted or misinterpreted, will lead to something better than what came before. That is the lesson of the lands between. That is the truth hidden behind the golden facade of the Erdtree. That is what we learn by shattering gods and claiming their power. We learn that power is a burden as much as a blessing. That order is a cage as much as a shelter. That every age, no matter how glorious, is built on bones and betrayal. And that even knowing this, we must still choose. We must still act. We must still try. Because in the end, that's what it means to be tarnished. To be marked by death and exile, yet still return. To see the truth of the world, its cruelty, its beauty, its impossibility, and still fight for it. Not because victory is guaranteed, but because the alternative is to give up, to accept the world as it is, to let the cycle continue unchallenged. The Elden Ring is shattered. The gods are dead or imprisoned. The world is broken. And from these shattered pieces, something new will emerge, whether that something is better or worse than what came before. That depends on the choices we make, the prices we're willing to pay, and the truths we're willing to face. The age of the Erdtree is over. The age of the Tarnished has begun. And the story, as it always does, continues.